start making your way back to your seats if you can find it. We're going to get started. Awesome. Well, thank you. Welcome. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning for you all. Great morning for you all. How many are enjoying everything this morning? All right, great. Glad you are here. If you're a guest, my name is Dan. I am the teaching pastor here. I get this awesome opportunity to open God's Word every week. This is Next Generation Sunday, as you have heard. As many of you know, if not all of you by now, I spent a lot of years working with teenagers, and I survived. It was awesome. You know, it was a highlight of my life apart from getting to be married and getting to be a father. Definitely ministry was to teenagers and just seeing what God does in teenagers' lives. This past week, if you were, paying attention at all, there was an app for a phone that made a lot of news because half of my Facebook timeline was filled with pictures of people that I know, even in here, about 40 years older. There was an app that came out called FaceApp, and it gave the ability to take a picture of you and make you look older. Perfect timing for us to have Next Gen Sunday because it reminded me that we're all getting older. We're not going to be here forever, and we need to be thinking about that next gen. So, like a good steward of culture and a good student of culture, I decided to run some pictures through this of people in here that I didn't tell you, and that's okay. Let's start up with two of our elders, apart from me. Greg, that's the older Greg and the older Dave Blackwell, according to FaceApp. Not too bad, not too bad. We have a person that is on stage about every Sunday who is very useful, very energetic, works with Alien Youth here, and that is Brant. And so I ran Brant through. Brant looks like Santa. Look, it's crazy. He's right here, so he's got a new position here. Should we use that? Anyway, and of course, I had to do Tom and I to be fair. I'm not going to lie. Mine freaked me out, and I'm like, do I look that old? That it made me look like I'm 100. It was crazy. My hair doesn't stick out on the sides. Anyway, Tom, the ageless one, his hair, still same haircut, but all white. So had some fun with that, and it is crazy to see that. Now the Russians know us because they're apparently spying, using it, and we're all dead. But anyway, I'm kidding. With that, it's fun to see that. It's fun to think about the fact sometimes that we're all getting older. But at the same time, it's convicting that we're all getting older, that there's a generation coming up that's beginning to outnumber us, that we have to take very seriously. And we need to think about how we reach them. I remember just a few days after Gavin was born, I'm holding him, and it's this crazy, surreal moment. Oh, my goodness, I'm actually a father. This is actually my kid, and I'm holding him. It's early morning. We're tired. Probably on my fourth cup of coffee by then, and it's only 7 a.m. And as I'm holding him, I have the news on. And there was this moment of irony. There's this moment of tension inside of me that stirred up because as I'm holding this wonderful child, thinking of all the dreams and hopes that I have for him as a dad, I'm looking and I'm seeing how destructive, how dark, how messed up our world is, how depressing the news is. And I'm thinking there, I have to bring this child up in this world. Am I doing enough? How am I investing in this child's life? Who else is investing in his life? It took me back. There was an old African proverb that a former presidential candidate actually wrote a book by the same title, and the theme remained the same, and it was, "It takes a village." And when I know when Hillary Clinton wrote that book, a lot of people scorned it, and yet I'll say there is some truth in it. I think there might be some disagreement on some of the details of how that's fleshed out, but I do believe it does take a village. I don't believe as a parent I can do everything on my own, but I do have a significant part of it, and that's the thing I can't just let go. But there's other voices in my children's life, some of them here at this church. And as a parent, I have to be very intentional about who is speaking in the village. See, if we were a village here, and we're a community here, there's lots of voices in here. But some carry more weight than others. Some have more power than others in our lives. There's certain people in here you know that you have a relationship with that when they speak to you, you lean in, you listen. But there's others that may talk to you that maybe you don't take as seriously. All of us are in a village, and all of us need to be involved with the raising of the kids here. Parents, first and foremost, your priority. First and foremost, don't miss that this morning. For spiritual development, it is on you the most. But the rest of us have a part to play. Even if you don't have kids in here, you have a part to play. I was thinking this past week of this whole thing of it, it takes a village, and I thought of something very, very powerful that most of you don't think anything about, but I have a mind that works at all times and thinks about random things. Road cones. You look at this road cone, I can, bend this thing in half and all of this, and you'd say, wow, that's dumb, Dan. Why are you doing that? Because this has more power than I do. You want to know how I know that? Because it can redirect trucks. It can redirect traffic. It can steer things away from damage and destruction that may happen. You put these up to around a pothole to keep people from blowing a tire. It can move traffic a different direction. And it got me thinking about how within our children's lives, there's a lot of these. Sometimes it's what they do and how they act. But sometimes these are people that direct them to a certain goal, that keep them from hazards. As I said, parents, you're one of the biggest ones. You are one of these road cones. Don't skimp on it. But there's other voices. There's secondary voices, if you will. Trusted adults, other family members. Maybe a coach or teacher that you know is trying to direct your child to the same goal as you. And then there's other voices, healthy voices that we know can help us. The problem is as parents, we don't scrutinize these enough. Some of you that don't have kids in here, this very well may be you, and it can be you. It can be you. Even if you're not volunteering here with Roots or AY or anything, this can be you. And it's an important role that you must take seriously. Road cones, though small, though I can run over my car 100 times, they are important because they help shape or help direct my car, just like those voices in your kid's life are going to help with behavioral as well as character formation. So we must scrutinize these voices. My big idea in the few minutes we have this morning is this: we can't forsake the future that's at stake. We can't forsake the future that's at stake. We can't just blow it off, especially those of us that may not have kids in here. Maybe we're not intending on having kids. Maybe our kids have graduated and we say, whatever, did my time, or whatever, I don't have kids, I don't intend on having them, not my problem. And we blow it off and we don't think it's important. Here's the thing. For those of you that may not be planning to have kids or don't have kids yet or whatever, like it or not, the kids in this ministry are going to impact your life. The generation that is coming up is going to impact your life because you're not always going to be the one who's in charge. They will be. And the way that we help raise them together is going to determine that future. I see a lot of people that complain about, how did the world get so bad? How did the world get so bad? For some of those, not all of them, for some of those, it's because they chose to not look at that next generation and help develop them and direct them like a road cone. And yet they complain how they got there. Well, it's on you, partly. It's on you. We can't forsake the future that's at stake. I'm going to take a look at a few verses this morning and show this lesson as you can see it in the nation of Israel in the Old Testament. God has brought Israel out of Egypt. Moses is their leader, and Moses is given the 10 Commandments and a lot of other laws that you see throughout some of the first books of the Bible. And one of the commands that he gives is with a national intent, that Israel would continue to be his people. And we find this in Deuteronomy chapter 6. This is called the Shema. It is still a very important piece of scripture in Judaism. It's one that we can learn from. And in Deuteronomy 6, God tells Moses and relays it to the people and says this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, The Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. Carries on and says, these commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. And he wraps up and says, tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. God says, first off, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength. Now, the way that you're going to relay that to the next generation is by these other things, to impress them on your children. The word to impress on your children, it means to teach. It means to really drive it into your kids' hearts, to not just casually talk about it. In fact, he says, talk about it all the time. And he says, to your children. Now, we would read this passage like, well, that's obviously talking about parents. Yes, it is. And this was a national effort here. Because in some cases, there may not be parents. And the community, the nation of Israel would have to come along and help in the development of someone that may not have parents. Or if a parent is failing at this, they had an obligation, the nation of Israel, to take care of the nation of Israel and to implement this. Three things that were in this that stick out to me was, God says, first off, you need to model this. You need to model it, parents. You need to model it, nation of Israel. Live it out. Love the Lord your God. Show it in your life. It should be modeled for kids to see, to learn from, to watch at a distance. But the second thing is teach. Sometimes we think, well, we teach first. But teaching was second. Live it first. Believe it. But then teach it all the time. Find opportunities, parents and others, to speak and to use it as a teaching moment, even as you're driving to school. Even as you're on vacation, you're at the beach, what an awesome lesson you can teach right there about the magnificence of God, the power of God as you watch the oceans that he created. So second was to teach. Talk about it all the time. Find reasons to do that. And then third was to promote it. It says to write it on the doors of your house, to bind it on your hands and your forehead. You know, within Orthodox Jewish Judaism, the tradition there is you will still see them wrapping leather straps on them with a leather box, or wearing a leather box on their head. And within that leather box is a scroll with Deuteronomy 6 on it. It's called the Tefillin. You also see them promote it in their house in Orthodox Judaism, because when you go into their house, there's a little thing by the doorway that sometimes they will bless, they will kiss, they will put their hands on. This is called the mezuzah. It also within it has the scroll with Deuteronomy 6 in it. And the whole idea is to constantly find ways to promote, advertise to your kid what God is doing. All of us can do that. All of us can find ways. My goodness, yesterday I was at Walmart down in Waterford, and I got planes going overhead with Geico behind it, you know, with the banner flying behind it. They find any way to advertise. And so we are to promote God any way we can, anytime we can, physically at times. These were the instructions given to Israel. This is how you make sure the next generation loves God with all their heart, soul, and strength. So obviously, everything worked out perfectly, just like God said, right? Wrong. A few generations pass. Moses passes away. Joshua takes over. They see miracles. God does these awesome things. They cross the Jordan River. They conquer Jericho. They conquest. God does great things with the nation of Israel. And then we get to Joshua's death. And right after Joshua, the great leader, dies, it says in Joshua 2, verse 10, after that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, that's talking about Joshua and all of the other elders of his generation, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals. Hold on. They were given instructions. What happened? How on earth could a whole generation die off and the next generation was like, who? Whatever. We'll go worship this fake god over here, Baal. Something happened. Commentators have all kinds of different opinions on what happened here. But I think there's a few things we can generally maybe assume, if not all of these, some of these that were true. One, parents didn't do it. They just didn't do it. Or worse, they didn't have the urgency in doing it. They didn't realize just how weak we are as humans, that we can easily lose track of what is most important. And so there was no urgency about teaching kids. Perhaps it's because the community of Israel, the nation of Israel, didn't prioritize it. They didn't see it as their responsibility. That's your kids. You take care of them over here. I got my own life. I got my own business and my own problems. I don't need to be watching after your kids. And they forgot that as a nation, they were to work together, to help parents, to come alongside of parents in the raising of those kids. Perhaps it was that the new generation that came up didn't have their own God experiences. You see, that older generation saw God do awesome things. I mean, they're crossing rivers, they're taking captives and blowing cities up and all this. I mean, they got to see God do great things. That new generation didn't see those, didn't remember them, didn't have them. I'm going to do a side note here for a second. Parents, find ways to allow your kids to have their own God experiences. God's done a great thing in your life. Make sure you set up the groundwork for them to have their own. That may be getting them involved in the ministries here where God can do something in them. That may be sending them out on a missions trip or going with them on a missions trip so they can have that God experience. Whatever it is, whether it's sending them to a Christian camp where they can just be around others their age and just experience God, set them up for their own experiences. Your stories are only going to carry so much weight. Even with my own kids, I can tell them about what God did for me and how God, this whole story of what God did in my life. But that's only going to work for so long. They need to experience their own. Set them up for their own God experiences. Or, lastly, this whole passage, maybe the old generation was assuming that blessing would come because, after all, we're the children of Israel. We're God's selected. It's just going to happen. And so they felt entitled that God had this duty to oblige them, even though they barely lifted a finger to do it. A proverb came to mind when I thought about that possibility that we'll look at in just a second. Proverbs 27 nails it on the head. And Proverbs, and now to set this up, this is talking specifically about physical wealth. But I believe there's a principle in here that we can apply to this. Proverbs 27:23-24 says this: "Be sure to know the state of your flocks and pay close attention to your herds, for riches are not forever, nor does a crown endure to every generation." What is this saying? This is saying, you know what, financially, pay attention to your assets. Make sure it's valuable to you, you're taking care of, because it's not guaranteed to go to the next generation. But more importantly for parents, if kids are your most valuable asset, if they're the things that are most important to you, you better be paying attention to them, because there is no assurance that it will pass on to the next generation. If your faith is that important, there's no assurance. If you don't lift a finger, you better be mindful of it. Lifeway Christian Resources did a survey this past year. This is not a surprise to many of you that are in the church, about the number of students that when they graduate, they're walking away from church. They're walking away from the faith. And their survey brought back that 66% of students that graduate from 12th grade are walking away from the church. Of that 66%, 69% of them never return. And they asked all of those that they surveyed about this, why did you leave? Why did you leave the church? And some of the results they had were, one, I moved to college and stopped attending church. They had to sort of reorganize their life. They're now independent. Mom and dad's not making them go, so they kind of just tossed that one aside. It wasn't a primary importance. Second, church members seem judgmental or hypocritical. To be fair, I see that outside the church too. It's just we're a little bit more scrutinized, and I get that, because we're trying to live a holy, righteous life. But the third one's the one that troubles me the most. I didn't feel connected to people in my church. That means that once they left youth group, they felt no connection with all of you in here. None. They didn't feel, it was like going into a brand new high school and trying to find your way. And that's a problem. That's something we have to take serious, because you have the ability, even if they are not your kids, even if you don't have kids, You have the ability to influence, encourage, and be in their life. And you have to take that seriously. To build relationships intentionally with students. Now, I tell you all this because this isn't about keeping Hope Church alive. This is not a sermon on how do we make sure that this church building is here in 100 years. This is more importantly about what Hope Church's mission is. That is to love God, love others, and serve the world. That is what we are to impart on our kids. That is what we're to impart on the next generation in this church. Hope Church is a part of that, but that's not the end of it. There is no guarantee this church will be here in 25 years. None. In 25 years, you may be driving down the road here and see a for sale sign. But it won't be because we didn't promote Hope Church enough. It'll be because we didn't promote Jesus enough. That's what will close these doors. And that's the responsibility on us all. The reality is, as I said, the church may not be here in 10 to 20 more years, but we have to keep our focus with our kids on the mission of why we're here and what we're all about. That they will live it out, even at a young age, in their schools and in their world, and live that mission out. If we don't step up and do that, please catch this. If we don't step up and fill that role, someone will. If we refuse to be this cone here to help direct students, direct children towards loving God and living that out, if we refuse, or we get over here, and now we've got this discombobulated, direction, kids will find their own way. But most importantly, someone else will say, hey, I'll be that cone, and they will direct, and they may not be ones that share the same values and importance as us. I'll give you a statement by a world leader in history. Whoever has the youth has the future. Whoever has the youth has the future. Man, is that true? You know who said that? I'll give you a hint. He's Austrian. One of the worst human beings to ever live. Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler knew something. If I can win the youth over to my ideology, if I can fill that cone and direct them, I'll have them loyal. But there was another important step to that. It wasn't just having the youth and why he set up Hitler Youth to follow him. It was because he knew the dangers of parents having influence in their kids' lives, so he sought to separate them from their families. He sought to fill the role that was the parents' responsibility to developing young people. He wasn't the only one. Vladimir Lenin of the Communist Revolution even says this: children are like soft wax, very malleable, and they should be molded into good communists. We must rescue children from the harmful influence of the family. They knew that the hurdle, the obstacle to them on their evil intents and ways was the parents and the family. And if they can just find a way to remove them, everything's easy. That's not an old concept. Did you know that's in the Bible? Daniel chapter 1, Israel is captured by Babylon. Babylon comes in, takes over. One of the first things that Nebuchadnezzar the king does is has the youth taken from their families and taken back to Babylon for training. Because even Nebuchadnezzar in the Bible knew parents have the loudest voice, and if we can just separate them, we can shape them. Little did he know Daniel and his friends could not be. But anyway, that's a side lesson for another time. Tomorrow is the result of today. Just like today was the result of yesterday. If you want the world to be heading in a better direction, then you're going to have to get involved with the next generation, even if it's not necessarily even your passion. It might be in a small way, but you can't just idly stand by and say, it's not my responsibility. I know it's not everyone's passion, but it is our responsibility. And it's something we have to take seriously. Parents, this morning, who are the road cones in your kids' life? Who is directing them? Do they share the same direction, the same values, the same way you want your kids to go? Are they lined up? Are you scrutinizing and being careful who is speaking into their life? Worse off, are you handing off that responsibility? I have had at least a handful of parents in the past in my youth ministry years that came to me and said, I am not able to raise my kids spiritually like you because you have a seminary degree. And I just shook my head. Because that's not my primary responsibility. It was the parents. The youth ministry and the children's ministry here are awesome. My kids are involved in them. And here's the beauty of it. I know that they're reinforcing things that we talk about in our home. I love that Gavin comes home and he shares all throughout the week things that he just learned in Roots this past week. That my daughter comes up and's like, you know what we studied about today, Dad? The sixth day of creation. I'm like, cool, awesome. They're reinforcing it, but the primary responsibility is on me. A seminary degree doesn't make you a stronger Christian. It just makes you maybe a more educated one. That doesn't mean that you aren't capable of it. Why do we put questions at the bottom of your sermon notes every week? To give you a tool to start a discussion about what we're learning in here with your kids. Whatever we can do to help you, we want to support that. Parents, who are the road cones? Get intentional about spiritual development. It needs to be a high priority. In a day where we have so many priorities that we give our kids, whatever it is, their interests or their pastimes or whatever, and those are good things, but sometimes they sacrifice the greatest thing. We will put them on the altar and allow them to become primary, and then we wonder why our kids walk away. The rest of you that may not have kids or anything like that, my challenge for you to think about, and you may say this morning, it's not my responsibility, based on your level of interest, valuation, investment in the next generation, what kind of results can we expect in the next 10 to 15 years? I don't say that to guilt you. I say that to make you think that the end result is ultimately partly on your hands, like it or not. As a church, how do we show we're all about the next generation? I have a couple ideas here that we're going to just do in closing. A next generation church, first and foremost, invests significant resources into the next gen. This means that as a church, as leadership, we need to put a chunk of the budget from your giving for ministry to continue the ministry here. We need to put a chunk of it into our children and youth ministry. If we're intentional about it, we have to show resource investment. And that's not just money. That's whatever kind of resources we can give them to help them succeed because we know how important it is. Second, a next generation focused church has volunteers or mentors. Some of you in here, hopefully the Lord has moved in your heart that it's time to step up and get involved. You may not know all the details and maybe it's not your greatest passion, but you understand the importance of it. And so you choose to volunteer. You go into the gym and you talk to Michelle or some of the others that are in there and you talk about that. But some of you, maybe that's not it. That doesn't neglect the fact that you can still mentor somebody who is younger. You can still check in on them when you see them every week. Hey, how's your week going? What can I pray for you about? That may be strange for some of you for the first time. But the more you do it, the easier it becomes. Third, a next generation focused church prays and encourages the next generation and their families. I just said that. You pray for students. Maybe it's from a distance. You don't just go up to them, but you intentionally pray for them every day, every week, and for their families and the volunteers working with them. It's a tough job being a parent today. It's not easy. They need prayer that God will give them the boldness to be that cone that speaks into their life and directs them. Pray for them. Encourage them. I'm sure many a parent need a person to just come up and pat them on the back and say, you're doing a good job. Hang in there. We got you. We're here to help you. Next, the next generation focused church integrates students into the body before graduation. Part of that's relationship. But part of that is where we include them in the ministries of the church. I'm thrilled that some help out when we do our homeless ministry, our sandwiches that we make. I'm thrilled that we took 2 teenagers on a mission trip to Jamaica this past year. I'd love to see more of that. But a church that's actually intentional about it is finding ways to integrate kids before they graduate because of that relationship factor there. Because if we don't, they're going to be ones that walk away and say, I didn't know anyone in there, and no one honestly minded me. So I can find companionship elsewhere. Who needs the church? Next, a next generation focused church stays relevant. I'm going to sit here real quickly for a few minutes. A next generation church stays relevant. That means this. In 25 years, if we are still meeting in the same auditorium, it looks the exact same. We're singing the exact same songs. The band looks the exact same. The preacher looks the exact same. All the volunteers look the exact same. The decor out there looks the exact same. The technology is the exact same. We're still serving the same food and all that. If all of that is the same in 25 years, we are going to die. Period. Too many churches die because they expect church to be based around what they want and what they're comfortable with, and this new stuff, this is our church. And I have relatives that have been in churches that have died because of that exact sickness. They didn't prioritize making the sometimes uncomfortable adjustments to music that they didn't care for, to technology they didn't care for, to teaching styles that they didn't care for. They refused to give it up because it was uncomfortable. And so, the result happened. They died. The church died. Most of it with them. We have to stay relevant. We cannot continue to do the exact same thing. We have to find new ways that are relevant to the young culture. And I will beat that drum to the day I die. So may we not look the same in 25 years. My final thought is this. People become what you invest, not expect. We expect things to happen. That's not going to happen. How did that work out for Israel? They become what you invest in them. May we not blow off the next generation as unimportant. Shame on us if we do. Let's pray. Even in the few silent moments here with your eyes closed and head bowed, I want you to pray about how God might use you with next generation. It's not necessarily volunteering, but maybe it is. Perhaps it's just that you become more intentional about speaking to some of the youth here, or the children, or maybe it's just encouraging the parents and the volunteers and loving on them. Whatever the case, I want you to just listen to God's leading this morning, and what is He putting it on your heart to do? Father, we want to see a generation that arises that loves you just as much as we do, that serves you just as much as we do, if not more, that serves the world and loves others. And Father, even in our weakness, or even in our maybe a lack of passion, Lord, give us a feeling of responsibility in helping raise this next generation, Lord. However it is that we get involved in that, even in the smallest of ways, it's powerful. And Lord, we ask, not that you would keep Hope Church alive in 25 years, although we hope for that, but Lord, that your kingdom would continue to grow, and that your kingdom would continue to expand because of how we raised the children and the youth here to love you with all their heart, soul, and strength. And God, we ask for that blessing. In your name, amen.